Welcome to Now We're Getting Somewhere. I'm Katie, and I'm a certified life coach, but I've also been a management consultant at McKinsey and a product manager at a tech startup. In other words, I know what it feels like to have a life that looks pretty good on paper, but doesn't feel as good as I want it to. I help my professional clients develop lives that are more meaningful, happy, and also more successful. And I want to share the same practical insights with you. Let's go. Everyone. Team, I want to share that I just feel like I'm taking deeper breaths, and I feel like I've taken in a long time. And it's very clear to me that the reason for that is that as of this week, both of my children are in preschool. And they're both in preschool for really almost 5 hours each day. One of them was in preschool before this for about a year, but it was only 2.25 hours a day, which, let's be honest, is basically nothing. And oh my goodness, just having the house to myself for 5 hours a day. I haven't even fully gotten that yet because there's been a lot of changes to the routines, but I've had larger chunks than I've had really for over 3 years. This week I've had that, and it feels so good. It's funny, having the house all to myself is something that I just personally love. The intense introvert, highly sensitive person in me just loves 4 walls around me and no one in them, and knowing that no one will be in them for a couple of hours. And it's just been, it's been so joyful to have the house to myself. So that's my personal update for this week. And for any of you who are back to school for yourself or for your kids, I hope you're having a good back to school or beginning of school. So this episode is part 2 of a series about how to work with your partner when you've changed, but your partner hasn't. And I'm answering a question that I got in from a newsletter subscriber named Jessica on that topic. So on my last episode, I shared 4 ideas for actions that Jessica might take to hopefully help her either accept her partner on the older path that he's on, or encourage him to join her on her new path. So if you haven't yet, I would recommend listening to that episode before this one. And today I want to take a slightly different approach to Jessica's question and focus on thoughts. But before I do that, I just want to reread Jessica's question so it's fresh in your mind. Jessica's high-level question in her words was, how do I work with my partner now that I have changed? She wrote in, "Hi, Katie. I have done a lot of work on myself, which has resulted in seeing the world differently, clarifying my values, and what kind of life I'd like to live. I'm married with 2 kids, and one of the bigger challenges I'm now seeing in my relationship and family life. I feel so awake to a new way of living, and my partner has not gone through the same transformation and awakening I have. I'm trying to encourage him to explore some of these things too, but also realize that this is really not up to me and maybe not something that is important to him. And when I start to think about this, I worry whether we will drift apart because of this, and he's expressed the same. I'm curious if you have any thoughts on this. How can I continue on my new path while still accepting if he wants to keep going on the old one? Or how can I encourage him to join me?" So as I said on the last episode, I offered Jessica 4 categories of actions she might consider taking to help her accept her husband as he is and also encourage him to join her on her path. But I didn't address one of the most tricky parts of this question, at least one of the trickiest parts to me as I sit with it, which is this question of degree, or how much, which I feel like is implicit in a few parts of Jessica's question. To me, part of how do I continue on my path while accepting if my partner wants to keep going on the old one is, how far can I keep going on my path before I perhaps damage my relationship too much? And how many changes can I make that he's not interested in? Or how many favors can I ask of him so I can pursue my path before it's too much? Similarly, part of her question, which was, how do I encourage him to join me, is how much encouragement of him to join me is okay, and how much would kind of strain the relationship and be too much that we couldn't recover from it. Again, how much? And Jessica also mentioned at the beginning that she fears that they might drift apart. And even that I would call a how much question. Like, how much can we drift apart before we aren't able to find our way back to each other again? We've somehow pulled the rope between us so tight that it snaps. To me, this question of how much, it's fundamentally a question of how much stress can we put on a relationship before it buckles? Do you all know what I mean when I talk about this idea of putting stress on a relationship? I think challenging moments can feel like they really test a relationship. Like they put a lot of stress, of weight on that relationship. Loss, grief, change can all be forms of stress. Versus in other moments of life, the relationship feels like there's perhaps very little stress on it. Maybe things are swimming along fine and the relationship feels very easy and like it's not weighted down or pulled apart. One of the fundamental questions I think you are probably in, as I said, Jessica, is how much stress can I put on this relationship before it snaps in two? I think this is a question that so many of us will find ourselves in at different times of our lives and in different types of relationships. So it's relevant to so many of us listening. And look, with steel or glass or red vines or carbon atoms, if I was a physicist or a chemist or some kind of fancy engineer, I could tell you how much pressure or stress is safe and how much would shatter or break into any of those substances. We could know that in a very precise way. But with a relationship, there's kind of no way of knowing in such absolute or precise terms. We can't 100% predict in advance or advise you, yes, do this, but no, don't do that. But also, I can say with a certain amount of confidence, I think you're going to have to put some kind of stress on this relationship in the next season of life. I'm not sure the relationship will be able to transform, to be able to become something new in the way that it needs to accommodate you as you now are, without some stress being put on it. Even something kind of quote unquote small, like say you wanting one night a week or a few hours every weekend or both even to pursue some new things that are important to you to fill your cup, which we talked about in the previous episode. If that's not something you've done before, that might cause tension that needs to be worked out. It might put stress on the relationship. And I think for some of us, stress can feel scary to put on the relationship. You might worry about it before you do it. You might worry about it while you're doing it or after. You might feel anxiety or agitation in your body. You might have all kinds of fearful thoughts. In my experience, both in coaching others and for myself, I think people in situations like this can think thoughts like, I'm a bad person, or I'm ruining my relationship, or I shouldn't ask for so much. And look, when we make choices or choose actions with the thought in our head, I'm a bad person, or I'm ruining my relationship, or I shouldn't ask for so much, I mean, all I want to do when I think thoughts like those is just go hide under my bed or under a rock and change nothing. My whole body feels terrified when I think thoughts like that, when I even hold those thoughts in my body. And I wonder if all of yours do too. And to you, Jessica, in particular, I'm not implying that you necessarily think thoughts like that 100% of the time. But for many of us, even if we know that maybe the most fearful thoughts are perhaps a little extreme, often we don't know what to think instead about what it means when we put stress on the relationship. We don't know what would be a useful thought to believe about what it means to put stress on the relationship. So today, I want to offer you 5 potential thoughts that you might choose to think during what is potentially an intense time for you and for your relationship. These are thoughts that, in my opinion, don't vilify putting stress on the relationship, but they also don't glorify it. I think they might help you have a more neutral relationship towards what it means to put stress on the relationship. If you were thinking at least some of these thoughts, at least some of the time, you don't have to be perfect. I want to be really clear about that. But if you were thinking some of these thoughts, some of the time, I think you might be able to make decisions that would serve you better and serve him better and serve the relationship a bit better. You might be able to evaluate options with a clear head and a clear heart without getting as overwhelmed or kind of stuck in the swirl of anxiety. I also think these thoughts might be helpful to anyone listening who perhaps might be feeling anxiety or some stress about stress being put on the relationship for whatever reason. So without further ado, here are 5 thoughts you might think about what it means to put stress on a relationship or how much stress to choose to put on a relationship. The first thought I'd recommend you consider thinking is, I will never know how much the relationship can hold if I don't put stress on it. I'll say that again. I will never know how much the relationship can hold if I don't put stress on it. I personally love this thought. It feels like it frees me up a lot. And I'll give also a personal story about why I particularly love it so much. I think Gil, my husband, and I, we jokingly alluded to this on that podcast that he and I did together some time ago. But our first year together was actually very rocky. And frankly, that was mostly because I was very rocky at that time. It was a very intense time of personal growth and really transformation for me. And frankly, I was not the most stable person to be with. I would have liked to have been a bit more stable. And I was trying very hard to be more stable, but I just wasn't. And the overall result of that was that it put some stress on our relationship. There was literally a time about 7 or 8 months in when we were sitting in a rowboat in the lake in Central Park. I remember this time so clearly. Gil was sitting there. He looked very handsome. I took this great photo of him at the time, but he was irritated and he was kind of trying to break up with me. And he was like, okay, is this really going to be a thing? We seem pretty unstable. Maybe we should just call it. And I will say it wasn't always like that. We did become much, much more stable over time. But one of the great gifts of the fact that we went through that time is that I have a lot of confidence that our relationship can handle quite a bit of stress. And I will say I'm not cocky about it. I know that at some point our relationship as well will need to transform again because I think all relationships do. And that will probably be rocky for us as well. So I'm not saying this to say, oh my gosh, I'm a relationship genius. We got it all out of the way in the beginning. It's more just a way of giving an example of the idea that you can put stress on a relationship and it can give you the profound gift of knowing in your core that that relationship can handle a certain amount of stress. To me, this thought, like many of the others, frees you up to have a more neutral relationship to putting stress on a relationship. I'm not advising that you go in and stick the emotional equivalent of 6 tons of iron on top of your relationship. I think you'll always proceed gradually if you possibly can. But also, maybe stress doesn't have to be just bad and scary. Maybe there can be good parts of it. And this applies to all the thoughts that I'll share today. So I'm going to say that one again before I move on to number 2. That first one was, I will never know how much the relationship can hold if I don't put stress on it. That's number 1. The second thought I wanted to offer you was, putting stress on the relationship may make it stronger. I'll say that again. Putting stress on the relationship may make it stronger. One of my favorite insights about bones, I gotta say, I'm loving all these stress-related metaphors, but one of my favorite insights about bones is that bones need stress on them. I've been thinking quite a bit about aging recently, and this issue of loss of bone density is obviously a really big issue, especially for women as we age. And one of the things I seem to keep hearing again and again, over and over, is you need to make sure you're putting some stress on your bones on a regular basis. Ultimately, that's what strength training is, right? It's lifting heavy things so your bones get some extra stress on them. I will say, recently heard about this thing called rucking. Have you guys heard about this? Apparently it's been used by special forces in the military for training for years now, and now civilians are doing it. It's basically taking a brisk walk with quite a bit of weight in a backpack on your back, like ideally a third of your body weight. They say that it's good for your health in a bunch of ways, but one way in particular is that form of stress, that extra weight on the backpack is very good for your bones, especially your hip bones, which are more likely to break as you get older. So what I love about this metaphor of putting stress on the bones is the idea that perhaps it's not only neutral, but there, again, could be some good elements, some strengthening elements to putting stress on a relationship. If you don't put stress on your bones as you age, you will likely lose bone density over the decades. And I wonder if we don't put stress on our relationships, maybe they decay, maybe they soften, maybe they lose some of their verve and vibrancy over time. And again, this is genuinely an optional thought. Truly, these are all optional thoughts, everything I'm offering you, but it is a thought that is an option for you. You are allowed to think it. You could believe about this process that you're in, that you are, for example, investing in the long-term density and strength of your relationship by putting stress on it. So I'll say that second idea again for you. Putting stress on the marriage may make it stronger. And if you're anything like me with my fearful brain, if you were working on the thought, putting stress on the relationship may make it stronger, your brain might at some point say to you, well, what if I put so much stress on my relationship that it fractures? I mean, bones fracture, bones break in two. Well, I'm glad you asked. That leads me to potential thought number 3, which is breaking and rebuilding is a natural part of life. Breaking and rebuilding is a natural part of life. Look, yeah, things break. Bones break in two. And also, bones can heal just as strong as before. Humans break bones every day and probably have since there were humans. And bones, if carefully and thoughtfully attended to, can heal just as strong as before. There's 2 parts to this metaphor that feel very important to me. The first one is maybe the obvious one: bones heal. I know I've said that a couple times. I'm going to say it again. Bones can fracture in two, bones can heal. And also, number 2, it may feel painful and tender, and it may just really, really hurt when a bone is broken and is healing. It hurts when your bone is broken. And that may not mean that anything is wrong per se. That may just be what it feels like to have a broken bone that is healing. On a personal level, I have had certain relationships fracture and heal themselves. It's painful. I'm not sure there is a way to break and heal it isn't painful. And also, again, just because it hurts doesn't mean something's wrong. That's just what it feels like when a bone fractures and heals. So that's the third thought I would love to offer you. Breaking and rebuilding is a natural part of life. The fourth thought I'd like to offer you is all paths may lead to the same result. I'll say that one again. All paths may lead to the same result. If you, Jessica, are worried about drifting apart or even, let's name it, getting divorced, both paths may lead to that result. You might be headed there either way. And on the flip side, it might be that no matter what path you take, you won't get divorced or drift apart. It might be that you won't get divorced again either way. All paths may lead to the same result. So I want to make this a little more specific in case that helps make it clearer. So let's start with this idea that both paths might lead to drifting apart. Let's imagine you think to yourself, I don't want to put too much stress on our relationship by making too many changes or asking for too many things, so I'm just not going to do anything. But despite ostensibly not making any changes, you might be kind of resentful underneath the surface. And that might still seep through, and it might, unfortunately, kind of poison the relationship in a million small ways. And unfortunately, that might lead to you drifting apart. But on the flip side, if you decide to make changes, that might, in fact, also put a lot of stress on the relationship. It might lead to distance, which is its own form of stress. And as a result, you might drift apart. So it could be that either way, there's the same result. You might drift apart. The relationship might fracture. But on the flip side, the relationship might also be fine. No matter what you do, you could put a lot of stress on it and it would be fine eventually. The bone would heal. It might even get stronger under that stress. Or you could make no changes. You could put no stress on it and it would also be fine. There would be no drifting apart. There would be no divorce. Again, all paths might lead to the same result. Maybe it's an option you could believe. Maybe if the relationship is going to hold, it's going to hold. And if the relationship is going to break, it's going to break. Either way, all paths might lead to the same result. And again, to be clear, I'm not saying this is scientifically true that all paths will for sure lead to the same results. Frankly, we could never know. There's no way to do a controlled study with something as complex as your very particular human life situation. But the point of consciously cultivating certain thoughts is to explore the question of what happens when you think this thought? Do you like who you become when you think this thought? And even more simply, is this thought useful for you? I quite like this thought. I apply it to a lot of areas of my life. So I want to give a personal example of how I apply this thought to my life. One area where it was very impactful for me was actually in consults with potential clients. For those of you who don't know, obviously I'm a life coach. I work one-on-one with folks and I offer free hour-long consults with people who are interested in potentially working with me. And if I'm being honest, I have been known to sometimes get in my head a little bit after a consult because all these people I meet are typically so cool and deep and thoughtful. And once I hear their story, I would just love to work with them. And I would sometimes find myself worrying. I'd be thinking, oh my gosh, did I see that in a weird way? Are they not going to want to work with me because I didn't do this one thing perfectly? And sometimes I'd get kind of anxious or I'd spin. And that thought has profoundly served me again and again, that thought I shared, which is, maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe no matter what I say, it might lead to the same results. Maybe people who want to work with me are going to work with me even if I say something kind of awkward on a consult, or I miss a key question that I really should have asked, or I don't pick up on the deeper importance of something subtle that they kind of alluded to in a moment. And maybe on the flip side, people who really aren't right for me, they aren't going to work with me even if I give my best consult ever and I'm incredible and I catch all the subtle cues and make my points exactly the way I would like to make them. Maybe that kind of decision making and the results of it, maybe they're beyond that. Maybe it will be the same no matter what I do. And I will say, I just, even explaining it now, I feel such a sense of relief at that possibility. And to be clear, it's not that I play no role into whether they decide to work with me or that I shouldn't be thoughtful about my actions. I mean, we could certainly imagine ways of taking this thought way too far. No one's going to want to work with me if I show up drunk on a consult or frankly, just don't give my best. But also, if we do move through the world with thoughtfulness and care and good intentions, if we move through the world trying our best within reason, maybe once those conditions are met, it would be the same either way. So that's a thought for you to play with. Maybe it would be the same either way. Maybe all paths would lead to the same result. And a second, I will say, bonus question to ask here might be, if it would be the same either way, how do I want to choose to act? I love that one so much. I'm going to say it again. If it would be the same either way, how do I want to choose to act? Okay, and now let's talk about my fifth and final thought for you today, Jessica. And before I name it, I want to say I a little bit debated about whether to include this thought, but I did ultimately include it because I think that I would need this thought and I would benefit from this thought if I were in your shoes. So I wanted you to have it too. The fifth thought I would offer you is, if it has to end, it will be because that was the best option. If it has to end, it will be because that was the best option. I feel a sadness in my body when I say that, and something low and quiet. I want to name, this is a big thing to say. It's kind of looking at one of the kind of quote unquote worst case scenarios head on. Because yeah, there is a possibility, I'm not saying it will happen, but a possibility that you could drift so far apart that your relationship might end. And to be clear, this is not me in any way saying in a cavalier way, oh yeah, divorce is no big deal. Go make radical changes, do whatever you want, change everything tomorrow. And if he objects, whatever, end it. It's for the best. Obviously, this marriage is very important to you. You would not have married him if you didn't love him and value him, and you share so much together, life, kids, memory, home. And I actually think probably however you decide to proceed, you'll probably proceed gradually with increasing amounts of stress if you're able to. It's just me saying, if I were in your shoes, there might be moments when I put some pressure on the relationship, some stress on the relationship. And I did so because I felt that it was the right choice. It felt right to me. And also, I might find myself afraid about whether I am putting too much stress on the relationship, either in one choice or in the cumulative effect of multiple choices. And those moments where I was perhaps afraid, perhaps clutching my heart, I might find peace by really looking at this possibility, this worst case scenario, and thinking if it has to end, it will be because that was the best option. To me, this thought is about saying, look, yes, the relationship ending is a possibility. Of course, it's a possibility for all of us who are married. Divorce is always a possibility. And if that worst case scenario happened, it would be because after a lot of love and thoughtfulness and trying, you both came to an understanding that this was no longer working. So allowing the relationship to end in that circumstance would be the best option. Yes, it might be hard and it could be filled with grief and uncertainty, but also if it was chosen by you or both of you or even just your husband, it would be because it was the best option. You or the two of you together would have chosen it because given all of the possibilities and all of the trade-offs, you felt it was for the best. And let's say, even if you didn't want it at all, even if he was the one choosing it and you wanted to stay together, let's explore that most kind of not chosen by you option. It would be because he knew he could no longer be the right partner for you. And even that, it would be painful, heartbreaking, perhaps terrible, but it probably would also be for the best, given the reality on the ground. And based on what you said, I do suspect there would be at least some mutuality to it. If that, again, worst case scenario did end up happening, I think it would be at least somewhat mutual. You guys do seem to be kind of somewhat on the same page about the state of your relationship. Again, I'm not advocating or pushing for divorce in any way, but for me, facing that possibility directly and realizing, yeah, look, there's a world in which this happens. Hopefully not, but there's a world in which this happens. And if it did happen, it would be because that was the best option. That thought would bring me some relief. It would open up my mind and my heart a little bit so I can make some better decisions about how to move forward, given my personal reality on the ground. Okay, so those are all 5 thoughts I wanted to share with you, Jessica. I'll just say each of those again. Number 1 was, I will never know how much this relationship can hold if I don't put stress on it. 2 was, putting stress on the relationship may make it stronger. 3 was, breaking and rebuilding is a natural part of life. 4 was, both paths might lead to the same result. And 5 was, if it ends, it will be because that was the best option. Again, these are all optional thoughts, but again, they're thoughts that are options. You might just steal one of these to think in your own brain. You might steal a few. And I will say, when I'm working with clients on their thoughts and we're exploring potential thoughts they might think, and I'm offering them some thoughts, one of 2 things tend to happen when they find a thought that they do like. One is sometimes a client will just get it. They're like, wow, I'm allowed to think that? This thought makes so much sense. And then they just integrate it right away. But at other times, people can see the truth in a thought. They can sense the potential relief a thought might bring. They like it and they would like to believe it. But for whatever reason, they don't believe the thought just yet. One of my core beliefs about this type of work is that that's actually totally fine. You can like a thought, but not quite believe it yet. And when that happens, you typically want to find a way to soften the thought into something that you could believe and then start playing with that. So tactically, let's say you liked the thought, putting stress on the relationship may make it stronger. You can actually notice that I've already softened that thought a little bit for you in advance. I could have said putting stress on the relationship will make it stronger, but I very purposely softened it already to putting stress on the relationship may make it stronger, because I know for most people that's kind of an easier one to believe. But you could soften it even more. It could be instead something like, it's possible that putting stress on the relationship may make it stronger. So, instead of just putting stress on the relationship may make it stronger, even just adding, it's possible that kind of, again, softens it. It makes it less, absolutely, this is true 100% of the time, which is the kind of thought that your brain tends to have more objections to. Or you could do something like, for at least some people, putting stress on the relationship may make it stronger. Because often the brain is more willing to accept ideas could be true for other people, even if it's not totally sure that it's true for you. And then once you believe really strongly that it's true for other people, sort of down the line, you could be like, oh, well, if it's true for other people, maybe it's true for me too. So it's a progression of increasing your confidence in a given thought. To me, this kind of work is different than using mantras, which for me, I don't particularly love mantras, things like, I'm a sexy goddess or everyone loves me, because I think they're just not believable. I mean, if you do believe those particular things that you are, for example, a sexy goddess, I mean, wonderful. But often mantras are just so strongly worded that they're really far away from what a lot of people actually believe. And if you're just repeating something that's miles away from what your brain is actually willing to believe, I don't think it really penetrates. I don't think it really moves the needle. It just never seeps in. So you want to instead pick a thought that you could believe. Maybe it's just one very small step ahead of where you are, or maybe it's exactly where you are. You want to be able to believe it. And let's say maybe you've mostly been thinking things like, oh my God, I'm going to ruin my relationship by putting stress on it. But then you're like, oh, but after we've had this conversation, Katie, I actually also believe that for at least some people, putting stress on the relationship may make it stronger. That for at least some people kind of softens it enough that you believe it. And let me tell you, if you shift your thought diet at least a little bit from 100% of the time thinking, oh my God, I'm going to ruin my relationship, to only 50% of the time thinking that, and the other 50% of the time thinking, for at least some people, putting stress on the relationship may make it stronger, even that shift, you would be astonished by how much less stress you might feel, for how much your decisions might be made with more of a clear head and heart, rather than just kind of fight or flight fear. I love this work because we don't have to 100% get rid of less useful thoughts. We just want to balance the ratio to bring more of some of those believable thoughts. It's like you don't have to 100% eat kale for every single meal. That's all you eat. Just bring some of it in and you will feel better and perhaps healthier, or substitute whatever healthy food you like. And when I say that you might want to kind of quote unquote work on that thought, what I mean is a couple of things. I'll probably do a whole episode on this some other time, but a couple of things. One, you might want to consciously remind yourself of that believable thought throughout the day. You might want to put it on a Post-it note so you can just kind of casually noodle on it while you're, say, washing your hands or driving. Like, oh yeah, I wonder if for at least some people, there are some ways that putting stress on a relationship could be good for it. Yeah, I think that could be true. So kind of noodling on it throughout the day. Or you might even do a bit of journaling. What I like to do here, I literally do this personally, is I like to find evidence for how a given thought might be true, and to do that for a couple of days in a row to kind of solidify that thought and the believability of that thought in my mind. So here it might be finding evidence for how it could be true that for at least some people, putting stress on the relationship could make it stronger. Just finding ways to think about a thought again and again, it strengthens those neural connections around thoughts that are more useful to you. And it can make those paths, which is really like what a neural connection is, more well-trodden. So they're easier for your brain to find. So it's just a couple of brief introductory ideas on working on your thoughts with a few really specific examples of options for thoughts you might think. And that brings me to the end of this podcast. And as I conclude, I just want to say, Jessica, I am so hoping that these are helpful to you in what I'm sure must be a pretty jostly time for you. I'm not sure there's a way to navigate these waters that you're in life without getting jostled at least a little bit, because we all get jostled in jostly waters. So I hope you will give yourself grace in that. I'm rooting for you so profoundly, and I know that everyone else listening is too. And I also know that you're not the only one who needed to hear this. So I hope you will everyone listening to this, find some community in the idea that there are so many others out there who are kind of aching in the same way with this question of feeling like we've perhaps changed or are different or putting stress on a relationship. You're not alone. I'm rooting for you, Jessica, and for everyone listening. You've got this. If you really want to change in a meaningful, lasting way, that's when you need a life coach. Every client I've worked with has had incredibly personalized reasons why they're in the tired or anxious or stuck or uninspired state they're in. Working with me can help you identify those roadblocks, which are usually blind spots that you genuinely cannot see, and implement a profoundly customized, doable plan for overcoming them. I have a very small, high-end, one-on-one coaching practice. If you'd like to be my next client, reach out at katiesiever.com. I'd love to meet you.